G'day everyone. Just waiting for a few more people to come in. I know it's very, very hot today. It's just ticked on 6 o'clock here, and it's 45 degrees here in Wagga. And no doubt it's pretty similar where you are. And I hope you're all been in the air conditioning today, or haven't done as much work in the paddock or out in the yard. So yeah, feel free to zone in and listen to us. Today, just some housekeeping before we start. There will be an opportunity at the end. We'll be able to go through whatever questions that you type through. You'll be able to type them in through the chat box down the bottom in the Q&A. We'll endeavour to get to most of them, or whatever the ones that we can answer. You'll appreciate that some of them might be a little bit niche and maybe not general enough to answer on a Zoom call, but we'll do our best. Today, you won't just have me as a succession planner here at Sprout Ag. You'll also have Angus Howard, who is a partner at Sprout. He's based in Wagga. He has many years in the finance industry, has been with Sprout for quite a while now. He specialises in finance and advisory and bank tendering and general debt advisory. So for a topic of funding a succession plan, he's a very integral part, and he's excellent to work with. Welcome, Angus.
Thanks, Glenn. Trust you can hear me okay, and yeah, appreciate you having me on board this evening.
No worries, righto. Without further ado, we'll get into it. I'll just share my screen, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully everything will be fine. Gus, can you see that?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right, so funding is succession. So just to start with, funding is probably one of the most important aspects of succession planning that can be overlooked, particularly within families and other professionals. Whilst we as facilitators have a general focus on funding as well, we can also talk about the roles and responsibilities, governance, structure, and everything else which makes a succession or a transition tick within most farming families. Of course, each family is different, but funding is often one of the main aspects that hold back a transition because families don't often have that general pathway forward, or the know-how or the knowledge to see what sort of options are out there for their situation. We at Sprout are very fortunate to have a very large debt advisory team around us. People like Angus, and we stretch right from Victoria all the way through to southern Queensland, but that doesn't mean we can go further. So it's the beauty of today's business, Zoom meetings and the like. So that's a very good part of our business. It's a very core part of our business as well. But today, I just want to have a bit of a disclaimer that we won't dive into, we won't go down too many larger rabbit holes. We need to keep it quite broad, as there's many families out there with different positions. But generally, within family transitions, there's so many scenarios that you can work on, and you'll notice that today there can be a combination of these funding options that can work together as a hybrid option, or there might be a few on here that we've also left out, but just for the sake of everyone's time, and it is dinner time and it's stinking hot, we'll do our best, but feel free to contact us if you've got any sort of really niche, in-depth questions. So the common funding methods that we sort of generally see, 99% or 90% of plans is commercial debt, and commercial debt's just another term for, say, term lending or with a bank, a usual traditional loan. We'll go a bit more into that. Leasing, particularly leasing between generations that might still be on the farm together, whether there's 2 or 3 together, or as that owning generation is stepping back and they need some sort of retirement funding. Vendor finance or second mortgage is more of a private way of doing things when maybe a bank has a bit of a shortfall and it can make up that sort of bridge. And we'll touch a little bit on investing off farm and the benefits of that, particularly for funding off farm members of the family, being say it's children that don't work on the farm or are, in towns and cities and don't have anything to do with the business, and that family wish to provide some compensation for them, as well as they might need a top up for their super and some cash flow as they move into their retirement. And also, I've put their ongoing drawings. This is a little bit more of a traditional method, which has been fallen back on definitely over the years that I've seen. It's probably not something that we push or advocate for a few reasons. I'll go through that at the end. So the main key considerations that we really need to focus on, particularly with debt funding, is we generally need to analyse the year in, year out debt levels of that business to ensure the debt level can be carried without causing too much stress. So we need to look at how much new debt is going to be taken on or how much old debt is going to be refinanced. We need to look at how much what's the capacity of that farm, whether it's a certain amount of arable area, DSC, or just sort of some average yearly turnovers for, say, if we're turning over steers and heifers and the like. So number two, obviously what I'm saying, sustainable year in, year out debt levels, not just the first year, but the second and third. What can the business afford to repay over time without compromising growth or resilience? So we don't want to be just passing a ball off to our teammate and them just surviving. We want them to run away and score a try as well. So security position, how will loans be secured under the new structure? How will that look like? The equity position, what percentage of the business does each party hold post transition? And that can be very important from asset protection, or if we want to hand over assets in a staged process, particularly if the farm can't afford it in one lump go, or if the owning generation still wants to hold on to some titles to have some security or borrow against, or if they just want to set up some potential financial guardrails for the next generation to integrate within the business to give them a little bit of ownership. And to follow on from that, the release of security. Will parents still own land, or is there more planned to release to reduce their exposure? A very important one that we probably look at before the ownership of land assets, because it's more often than not that I enter a lot of family planning, that the transfer of assets isn't the most important thing straight up. That's not important. The owners might be still young, they might be still sort of on the farm and involved, and they might be still want to be part of the expansion process, or they just don't want to give up what they've built just yet. Totally fine. Let's look at the ownership of the business structure and the trading structure. What does it look like now? Are the parents sole owners? Do we want to set up a partnership? Does a trust need to be set up? What needs to happen to go there? So what are the pros and cons in that? Who owns it, and who controls the day-to-day operations? What needs to be funded for that? Do the kids want their own freedom? Do they need their own overdraft for maybe their own separate enterprises, but still tied in with mum and dad? The compensation strategies. What are the financial arrangements for the siblings and the retiring parents? I just touched on that earlier. And the bank implications. How will second mortgages or cross-collateration affect borrowing power? We really need to look at that, especially when we look at first-rate and second-rate mortgages. Viability is a major thing that we look at, particularly as a finance company, as a debt advisory company when we're doing our succession plan. As I said before, and it probably won't be the first rugby analogy that I'll use, but we don't want to pass the ball as a hospital ball. So what can the farm afford? Cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. Very, very important. As I said before, we look at the year in, year out position. So take stock on what the current operating position is. How healthy is the balance sheet at the moment, and how is that working, or your statement of position? The cash flow forecasts we need to look at. When and how can the business reduce debt? So we'll be able to put in some possible probables and look further into the future and look at some sort of more specific times of when might be a good time to pay down some principal and that sort of thing. CapEx requirements on the horizon. Is there that boundary fence that the neighbour is pestering you about that we need to fix up and outlay some capital? Do we need to update the wool shed to make things run a bit smoother? Do we need to update some internal fencing? Do we need to update that tractor? What needs to happen? And we need to sort of try and budget for that as well. Can the business support the transition now? If not, when? A lot of people have been called out throughout the generations that succession needs to happen now, because often before a lot of facilitators come into the business, that succession has been treated as just a sudden handover. But if we can look at it as a gradual transition, as maybe carving off just a different gradual handover to the next generation, whether it is business or assets, maybe that's one way to look at it, so that it can afford it if we can. And if mum and dad need to move off the farm due to maybe old age, or they're just sick of it, it really doesn't matter. You can look at sort of options there. So to flow on from that, what needs to happen within the business? Do we need to expand to split, if that's the case, if we're splitting? Do we need outside income to assist the debt servicing? And this could be from the next generation coming through. Yeah, we can do a business plan where later on I'll show you, a certain amount of sheep and cattle turnover with 60% operating expenses can service a bit of debt, but maybe we can top it up with maybe a partner of that couple has a part-time job in town, bringing in a little bit more money, or whatever it is. Or off-farm assets, how is that going to look, whether it might be a commercial or residential property? Personal cash flow, very important going into retirement. One of the major things that we get the owning generation to do is just to do a bit of a mock-up personal cash flow just for them. So without the business, and so it really helps with our budgeting in our transition plans, that we make sure that they've got enough, if not surplus, for those unexpected medical bills or mechanical bills, whatever it may be, into their retirement, to make sure they're comfortable. We've got families, we've got couples that retire that, they might only need 50 grand a year. That's fine. But then we've got some people that might need 250 grand a year. There's no judgment. It's just usually based on their lifestyle needs, such as travel and the like. And the off-farm generation. So what are the expectations for them and their compensation? So commercial debt is probably the first one we'll just touch on. So it's usually utilised for a payout to fund the owning generation into retirement, pay out other siblings and everything else. In this example, there's existing debt in the business. As ownership or management transitions, this debt may need to be transferred, refinanced, or increased, particularly if the business is expanding or if the asset transfer is involved. Or it's a really good idea if mum and dad are stepping back from the day-to-day but remain involved while the next generation ramps up operations and growth. In this instance, both generations are working together, but often the parents still hold the land and assets and therefore remain tied to the business. So a few scenarios. So clean debt, funding a payout. If a farm holds the debt, which the owning generation, the next generation wish to be wiped prior to the transaction, it should be noted that this wasn't always possible to occur. So it's really awesome for the next generation to come in and not take on any pre-existing debt that mum and dad have. So sometimes it's good to sort of look at if the farm can afford it, we can have a clean slate and a clean debt payout. The owning generation, in this case, would like a payout in a lump sum, as well as compensate some off-farm children. So disregard the previous slide of both generations in there. This is they're stepping away. So prior to running the numbers, we need to really make sure that, because it all depends on the wishes for mum and dad. This all comes down to mum and dad and what they want. We create their asset policies within the family that highlight all the assets, who can own them, who currently owns these assets, and how can the next generation own them. So, for example, Sam and his wife are coming into the business. but he's required to work in the business for 7 years until he qualifies for that asset. Yeah, Troy. I'm sorry, Angus. Did you just want to touch on this scenario and see how, sort of what are some of the major things that you see from a bank perspective when this is happening?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as always, the farming business is broadly, the asset base or the balance sheet has, they've evolved a lot and they've grown. So we've got a lot of capital tied up in these assets, often the land itself. So I guess, if we talk about a clear payout or I guess a transition where the next generation step in and take out a loan with commercial bank, often that bank will have maybe some additional questions around the incoming generation, around their knowledge and ability to run the business, and during that transition will there continue to be any guidance maybe from the older or the exiting generation. The bank might have a lot of confidence in the existing generation. However, they're just looking to understand the new generation and who's actually going to be responsible for the debt. Bear in mind, the scenario there on the page is looking at, I guess a figure of $10 million. There was an existing debt in that business of $2 million. The exiting parents require, I guess, a capital contribution up front of $2.4 million. There's an allowance there for the off-farm children of $200,000. So we've sort of, that's been staged at saying that, this new or the incoming generation required $2.6 million of new debt, plus to carry on the existing $2 million. So we've got a debt there of $4.6 million. And that obviously, needs to be assessed as we're talking about that year in, year out side of things. There's we've got to make sure the business continues to operate in a profitable manner with provisions for challenging conditions. You talked about CapEx or that ongoing reinvestment into the business and potential growth, whilst also meeting tax obligations and drawings or personal living allowance for the new family. The only thing I might touch on there, Glenn, is also there's non-bank lenders as well. RIC, Regional Investment Corporation, they act in this space in their agri starter and succession loan. That could be worthwhile looking into. There's certain eligibility criteria around that, and they can fund up to 50% of a transition or a purchase, capped at $2 million. And then there's also for CapEx and whatnot, this is tied to a little bit around the land ownership. There's also RIC and other innovation loans there. Once again, quite important we get the security structure right before those loans can actually be deployed. But yeah, that's all I've got to say at the moment, Glenn.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's good to have your insight, particularly with the RIC loans and things like that. And if anyone's in this webinar that wants to dive into that a little bit further, and you've probably got a few burning questions on that, feel free maybe to put it in the chat, but or we can or you can contact us later on and we can go and do your situation. So just to expand on that table further, can the farm afford this? So what we really like to do here at Sprout is do just a business plan that's serviced through our bank tender analysis, which we do with a lot of our bank tenders, and our bank tenders are very, very involved, but this is just one small component of it. But yeah, so the property value is 10 mil. The loan was 4.6 mil, and we just did some basic, very conservative numbers. And I like to be very conservative just to start with, just to see if it is viable for this particular farm to go through with this. So they turn over 500 steers and heifers at $1,800 a head. I mean, if they're lightweight steers at the moment, it's going to be a little bit less than that, but I'm just trying to, it's pretty hard to pick a middle ground at the moment. And 2,000 lambs at $250 a head. Operating costs, used to put in about 55%, but just to be safe, just put in 60% for this. And we just try and keep it at an interest only. And I've noticed I've just left a zero off the end of there. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. So we see over here, from a debt servicing point of view, the DSR, the debt service ratio, Baseline from a banking perspective is usually sort of 1.5. So they're just creeping in over that. So they've got enough. It's got enough to go in, even from a principal and interest payment. But at a sensitized level, it's looking pretty hairy. And that sensitized level is 2% over that 6% that I've put into the calculations there. So that's baseline stuff. A lot of in our business plans, we can also put in everything. So whether it's outside income, salary from other people in the partnership or whatever else, cropping income, wool income. But for today's example, I've just kept it very, very basic. But these are a lot of the tools and calculators that we really need to look through from then. This is just year one from a business plan scenario. This isn't year 2 or 3. So this is say we'll just use his name from before, Sam. He's coming through with his wife. This is probably the absolute bare minimum that they'd need to run. But there's ways of working around this and moving things up and down just to see how things will work. Yeah, from an example business plan perspective. But this is very, very vital and important, particularly when we build our bank tender to go to the banks, to go into court or go into bat for the next generation for them to get some funding. We can also incorporate mum and dad's guarantee or whatever it may be. So leasing is also a pretty sort of common way. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that before within transition planning over the years. It's a common method, obviously, to fund retirement or stepping back. When I say retirement, I don't obviously sometimes mean it's not full-on retirement. It could be just mean stepping back. And the family, the mum and dad have a nose-in, hands-out situation where they've got an interest in the business where they make executive decisions from larger capital expenditure decisions or acquisitions or even divestments, but the operational day-to-day is done from the next generation. It allows next gen to run their own enterprise, and then it gives them some proof of primary production. Say they can do it for 5 years, and it gives the bank some confidence in them that they can run an operation or run on some land that they are leasing by themselves, and gives them a good case or a good argument for commercial funding. A good option for asset protection for the owning generation. As I said before, sometimes it's not as important to hand over the asset straight away. Maybe they just want to keep it for whatever reason. The business can be transferred, but the land is held in the owner's hands. And as I said before, it's lower upfront capital for the next generation to just enter into farming in general. So it's a really good way. The whole place doesn't need to be leased out, but it could be in a gradual title handover. And I need to click on it so it goes through. Vendor financing or a registered second mortgage. So a second mortgage is when an existing property already has a first-rate mortgage against the land, and a second lender, often parents, takes a second-ranking security over the same property. So essentially, mum and dad are the bank to hold the loan. It's a great way for the next generation to have land in their name. It can help bridge the gap if the bank won't fully fund the full amount of what is needed in the transition to make up the shortfall. Or it needs to be clear, because at the event of the default, the first mortgage is to be paid first. And Angus can maybe just touch on just the priorities there on how it could usually work. Yes.
Yeah, Glenn. So just briefly, with any sort of co-financing arrangement, whether that's say with a commercial bank and a family loan, or a commercial bank and say the RIC, often there's a first and second mortgage, and that first registered mortgage will often arrange for a deed of priority to be put in place, and basically declares that first ranking mortgage has a certain amount agreed upon, and then the second mortgage, I guess, comes in thereafter from a security position. It's common that the bank takes first. Not always. It's often, a negotiation with the bank and parties involved. It's common that they take first. Sometimes it could be beneficial if they take second. And there's pros and cons around that. There is also potentially an impact on the pricing. When I say pricing, I mean interest rate at the commercial bank. If they have the first ranking mortgage, their LVR calculation is often more favourable and may provide a better interest rate overall versus, say, the bank taking a second rank. But that's about all I've got to say on that, Glenn. Yeah.
No, thank you, Gus. Appreciate the insight. We've got a bit of a scenario here on that. So, for instance, I'll probably just have a little bit of a disclaimer too. Often in succession, families set up a second mortgage. Fantastic, keeps everyone happy. Everything else, it's written up on a document, and then it sits in the top drawer. It's very important that is registered, particularly from an asset protection point of view. So it is enforceable. It's all very good to have a private arrangement, and today I've only just gone into second mortgages as a sort of a private arrangement. But obviously there's a vendor finance, traditional vendor finance, where you can just have sort of a spoken thing between generations. But that's very, very tricky when it comes down to asset protection if mum and dad need to protect it on that front. But I'll just go into the scenario. The Smith family operate a $20 million farm asset with an existing farm debt of $2 million. It's agreed the next generation will purchase farm for $8 million and take carriage of the existing $2 million business debt with $10 million. So it's a $10 million buy-in in total. So this is an example of family bank and family co-finance. The new commercial bank loan is $6.5 million. That's the first registered mortgage. The vendor finance with mum and dad is $3.5 million. So the total sale value, sorry everyone, is $10 million. The existing business debt is $2 million, and so the net funds, the funds available to the outgoing generation, being mum and dad as the owning generation, is then $4.5 million. So for example, 3.5, the vendor finance with mum and dad is then $3.5 million. The interest rate, the family rate. So this is 4%. So this is obviously a little bit lower than a commercial rate. A lot of people ask, well, how do we pick a rate? Well, the most important thing we need to look at is what are the needs of the owning generation moving forward, as well as what the business can afford as well from a viability point of view. So this can be registered up and down. That's fine. But it really comes down to the needs of the owning generation and the affordability of the next generation coming through. We also need to take into account if the next generation has any sort of debt of their own or what is their financial position as well. In this instance, it's, it can be just an interest-only setup of 140 grand a year, which with an agreed maturity date, so you can put a term on it, whether it's 25, 30 years, it really doesn't matter. But just as long as mum and dad are being supported. It can also be set up so that the principal, that repayments can pay down on the principal, and that can really help equity be transferred in a very gradual manner without the bank as well. So the security is a second mortgage. And so this is just a very basic way of explaining it. There's quite a few ways to skin a cat. And no doubt there's a few accountants in here sort of yelling at the screen at the moment, but please, we're trying to keep it general this evening in the 45-degree heat. So there's quite a few pros with the vendor finance. It preserves working capital, so you've got less cash tied up in the purchase. So, for instance, particularly if there isn't a bank loan needed and it's just a vendor finance arrangement with mum and dad, well then the existing generation can come in, excuse me, and do up whatever capital expenditure is needed. They might be able to go and buy that spreader or buy a few more stock to put on or whatever the season may require at the time. You can set up whatever way you want. It's a lot more flexible than say than just term debt with a bank. But you can align payments with harvest, livestock sales, and seasonal income. So it's not just that quarterly or monthly. It's a lower entry barrier for the next generation. You might need no deposit or small deposit. For instances, you might just need a deposit to say pay out siblings or the existing generation, or mum and dad might need just that larger capital payment up front just to get things moving for their retirement, or they might need to fund a trip to Alaska. Who knows? And as I said before, it builds equity gradually. There are some cons. You are tied to mum and dad, or mum and dad, you are still tied to the kids. And this might not work from a relationship point of view. It can put pressure on there. So it's very important that before initiating this, from a funding perspective, like traditionally it might have been in a lot of transition plans, that we need to do a lot of work with both generations to make sure that they're going to work together just from a logistics and a relation point of view. And then we get that governance, roles and responsibilities aspect of the strategic plan in tip-top shape. So that's vendor finance. We're going to move on to off-farm assets. Please note that we're not pushing this. This isn't investment advice at all, but this is just what we've seen with particularly with a lot of larger high-performing families. Commercial property, excellent net yield. Residential property can provide spots for retirement, especially if they're Airbnbs, or also off-farm compensation for kids. A managed fund, particularly with shares, equities, futures, whatever it may be, ETFs. We've got a few contacts within our Sprout network that can point you in the direction of this. And also good old super. Good way to sort of invest in and draw upon for retirement. But that's pretty common on, and I think I just threw that in as maybe as an afterthought because sometimes it can be a given. So off-farm assets in succession can grow the asset base that can be retained in the owning generation's hands for as long as they may need, but providing an income stream to only increase. This can also be a separate, investment venture that is separate from the farm. Angus, what have you seen some pros within the off-farm assets, maybe even particularly in the commercial property game? Yeah.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, I mean, ultimately what we're usually trying to do for, say, in any sort of investing, it could be on farm or off farm, is potentially utilize the balance sheet or the equity that's already there. And so there's various ways to sort of do that and sort of leverage that position. We have seen, some successful acquisitions of commercial property that seems to complement a farm business really well. And some common, feedback or rationale for clients looking to, say, off-farm investments. Part of it's around their operations themselves. They might actually have a reasonable scale, or have things right where they don't have to employ additional staff members, or if they bought that extra farm, they might need extra equipment, and they've got good economies of scale, and they're just looking to sort of continue to grow, and they grow that off farm and utilize that balance sheet. So commercial properties work well. Obviously, you touched on some other asset classes. So there's various ways to do that. And that can be for, building resilience into the business, the existing business, with consistent cash flow or non-farm cash flow. But it can also assist as annuity streams for retiring family members and whatnot. So, I think there's a whole session in that by itself, Glenn, on
definitely
growth and leveraging and both investing into more farm assets, but also non-farm assets. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, guys. Yeah. No, it's some good points. And I'll probably just point out quickly. We're going to endeavour to have a webinar once a month, and each webinar will have a different topic, and maybe in the future we can sort of elaborate on this sort of venture. Yeah. I'll just click to the next slide. So, for example, as I said before, commercial property is a very sort of common one. Capital growth over time. The property values may increase in line with rental yield growth and CPI-linked sort of rent reviews, which isn't very common in rural land. It decouples the debt. So as I said before, as the loan is paid down, the commercial debt can eventually be removed from the farm's balance sheet, freeing up the original rural asset. So originally, it's a very good way to leverage some equity from the farm. But later on, as the family's needs change, we can decouple that. And most importantly, we've got to look after mum and dad in this situation. So the income stream, upon full repayment, the commercial property can offer a secure income for retirement and future family needs. For example, the property purchase could be $6.5 million. The interest rate on that, interest only 5.5%. The annual interest costs $357,500. Then there's the net rental income, which is very, very good at $455,000. So the loan repayment strategy, you can use the excess rental income to use to pay down your principal, or if you just want to keep it there, you can just pocket the cream off the top. It really depends on where you're at the stage of life, or you can choose to pay a little bit of down over time. So the acquisition from there is paid from the cash reserves. Example, the stamp duty. Another option is to a scenario that we've come across, this is actually a real life scenario, is growing. The property might not be large enough at the moment to fund a succession or to provide a viable operation moving forward for each member of the family. So and often an option that we look at is you can grow together and split. This family we did was up in Queensland. They had quite a large asset base. They were part of a trust, and there was 4 boys as the next generation. They were all married or engaged. So the issue was the next generation wanted independence and clarity for the future. This is pretty normal, and I'm sure a lot of you are nodding your head. Parents wished to be set up financially in their forever home, finished off farm. There was 2,000 acres that was jointly owned by the 2 oldest brothers, and they wished to separate. The younger brothers wished to have 1,000 acres in their own name. There was a severe lack of roles and responsibilities within daily operations and executive decisions. Not only did they own some land in Queensland, they had an off-farm, a camp, or you could say a campus property, some more land, probably 4 hours away, to the extent of 10,000 acres. And the issue was that nobody really knew what their job was. And a major thing that we look within family operations is how's the governance working before we move on to anything else. The parents wanted to step back. They were getting on a bit, but they just wanted to step back out of the business. But they still wanted to have a nose in, hands out approach. They had built this business from the ground up. It started really low, but then it was the land and business was worth quite a bit. And if they were to split it all up now, they were to be because if they owned some of the land, they only bought some of the land recently, rather. The transfer of land now would incur a very large bill, and this was into the tune of multi-million dollars. So a few people could look at this and go, right, we can raise some hard debt just to get it paid out and done, but why would you when everything's so healthy? So the solution for the trading entity to start with, we because it was part of a trust, we kept the parents appointed to the trust. It's fine, keep them there. They can still hire and fire. They aren't burdened by the daily operations. Guidance can still be given on large decisions such as land acquisitions and significant capex or capital expenditure. This was to the wishes of the parents, which we always look for and guided by here at Sprout within our plans. They want just to remove a bit of angst, if you will, formally recognise the next generation into the trading business. They're no longer employees on $1,000 a week, but now they had skin in the game and they were incentivised by seasons. They didn't really, before, why did they care if the crop went 6 tonne or 2.5 tonne per hectare? Now it's in the bigger seasons, and if there was enough profit, they could set up a profit share, and they could be a lot more sort of interested and engaged in the business. So it was the easy way just to make trustees. This was quite a large family and might not be appropriate for everyone, but we advised that a family advisory board was set up. And so this allows for participation, planning, decision making, accountability through formal agreements, and then family council meetings and expenditure guidelines. So they could have regular meetings for those who are in the business, and for the broader family, they could also have regular meetings and choose what sort of info is shared, just so people aren't burdened by sort of information they may not need to know, and B, it keeps things smooth and keeps everybody on the same page. And again, clear roles and responsibilities to ease the tension. Land, in this scenario, next generations were made trustees of the land trust and the trading trust. So there was two trusts, a land trust and a trading trust, and that was set up from a tax perspective. The parents still retained all the land currently held in their personal names. They had some land in personal names. This land, and then that land was transferred through an estate plan. The farm trade entity pays a lease out to parents, and provides an additional personal income. 1,000 acres each was appointed to the younger sons via the will immediately. And this was in the houses and the land that these younger boys were in, and they were doing renovations on the house, and they just wanted to know, is this going to be mine one day? Well, yes, it's going. We've just put it in the will. If it, it doesn't matter what we're working towards, this will be yours, and that just gave them peace of mind for their family that what they're working towards is a common goal. So, for instance, the next 10 years, mum and dad were still going to be in the business. They were going to incur a colossal amount of capital gains tax if they were to split everything now. So the focus shifted. Everything was set up. We've set up and we've cleared out all the guidelines and everything else from the day-to-day operations. Everyone's a lot more happy. I could see the weight being lifted off their shoulders. Now let's focus on growing the pie. Right, what's the goal? We did some interviews. What would work for you, son number one or son number two? Oh, maybe it is 5,000 acres in this area. Right, we've got a pie, and we've got a goal to work towards to grow and expand the business until there's a viable amount for that split to occur. Or they could get to that 10 years and keep a cousin consortium and grow bigger and bigger from there because the governance works so well. But that's another way you can look at growing the pie. The other one I just want to touch on is ongoing drawings. This can work really, really well. If there's, for instance, there's an element of that in this family as well. This works really well if there's plenty of cash flow in the business and it can support mum and dad. Sometimes that just doesn't work in families, but we've got to look at it from that perspective as well. Mum and dad might not want the next generation to go into debt. That's totally fine and really understandable because, if they're willing to still be tied to the property in that way, well then, yeah, we can set up some ongoing drawings for the farm. This could be tied in with super as well. Sometimes it might not be just 120K a year straight from the farm. It could be maybe 50K a year, or there could be multiple siblings that are combining together to make up this figure for mum and dad to move forward. Obviously, the cons are mum and dad are still tied to the property ongoing. But if this isn't an issue, by all means, this can happen. And I apologise, I haven't got a slide on this, but it's pretty straightforward. So thank you very much. That concludes the slides. I'll just see, Gus, while people might want to put in some questions if they've got any. Gus, did you want to add anything in there? Yeah.
Thanks, Glenn. Nothing really. I mean, you were talking there about drawings and whatnot. I guess in that aspect, yeah, the business performance could, I guess, directly impact the drawings ability for say the exiting generation, and that's something to be aware of, as that that mum and dad example, sort of. Move on with their life. We are conscious around them and their living costs not being tethered to the farm performance, especially if consecutive challenging years. We'd hate for their personal living allowance to basically not be available or not readily available to meet up with their living costs and maybe health insurances and bits and pieces like that. So that's just something I was just thinking about as you were chatting about it, Glenn. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Gus. Look, looks like we don't have any questions, which is a little bit different from our last webinar there, Angus. But that's totally fine, unless I can't see them properly or whatever else. But that's fine. Look, this will all be recorded. So if you want to go back and watch it through, we'll be posting a link up to YouTube soon. But as I said, at the end of the day, funding is very, very important, and it needs to be looked at in depth with a very decent analysis. All of our plans are run through an accountant, and all of our plans are run through a solicitor. And if needed, we can bring in a financial planner as well for multiple reasons to either help that next generation come through, I beg your pardon, the owning generation retiring. But we've got a very large team here at Sprout Ag with a lot of knowledge and expertise, particularly on funding. Myself and Troy Constance, the CEO, we do many plans and see many different balance sheets and statement of positions. But I hope this has been beneficial to you and your family. But if you've got any sort of further questions, please contact us directly, me or Angus. Me for succession particularly, or Angus or any sort of debt advisory or anything like that. And we'll be able to have a good chat and help you out. But ultimately, we need to make sure that all of these funding solutions need to be for your family, be viable, and fit within the owning generation's wishes and to look after mum and dad. So I'll wrap it up, and I will hope you have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Angus, for jumping on and providing some excellent expertise and backup within this session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn.
Cheers.